Strong viewers, welcome to the episode 13 of ISO 9001 2015 series. And in this episode, we will be discussing about clause number 7, which is support. Clause 7 is divided into five sub-clauses. 7.1 is resources, 7.2 is competence, 7.3 is awareness, 7.4 is communication, and 7.5 is documented information. Most of the requirements in clause 7, they are quite straightforward, and I will not go into the details of explanation for each and every statement. Wherever I will feel that the explanation will add any benefit, I will explain it. Otherwise, I will just read the requirements. So we will start from 7.1.1, which is general. And it says that the organization shall determine and provide the resources needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of quality management system. It's sort of a commitment from the top management that whenever any type of resource is required, whether financial or manpower or machinery or any type of resource, the management will be providing those resources. So it's sort of a commitment which is required from the top management. The organization shall consider the capabilities of and constraints on existing internal resources and what needs to be obtained from the external providers. So both the things needs to be considered: what we have right now and what type of constraints we have in the capabilities, what we are carrying at the moment, and what we have to obtain from the external providers, whether it is product or services or trainings or any other competency requirements which we need to acquire from the other organization. That needs to be considered. 7.1.2 is about people. What sort of manpower you require, the organization shall determine and provide the person necessary for the effective implementation of its quality management system and for the operations and control of its processes. So we are talking about the manpower, that the right manpower needs to be provided for all the operations which are coming under the quality management system, which is again quite straightforward. No further discussion is required on this particular clause. As far as clause number 7.1.3 is concerned, this is related to infrastructure. A standard says that the organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the infrastructure necessary for operations of its processes and to achieve conformity of its products and services. Again, quite straightforward, that whatever buildings, whatever associated utilities you require, whatever equipment you require, whatever hardware you require, whatever software you require, whatever transportation services you require, or whatever information and communication technology support you require, you need to make sure that it is available, just to make sure that the product and service conformity is being maintained. Clause 7.1.4 is related to environment for the operations of processes. According to this clause, the organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the environment necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve the conformity of products and services. So whatever product you are producing, to produce that product according to the quality and requirements or the customer requirements and legal requirements, you will be requiring certain specific work environment. It might be related to some physical conditions, maybe the temperature, maybe the speed of the machine, maybe the humidity, maybe the heat, maybe the light, maybe the airflow, maybe the hygiene, maybe the noise. So all those conditions which are necessary for the conformity of the product and services, you need to make sure that you are providing those work environmental conditions. Similarly, there might be social conditions which might be required. Non-discriminatory environment might be required, a calm environment might be required, non-confrontational environment might be required. So those social condition needs to be provided as well. Similarly, at the same time, because we are relying on the human beings and not 100% relying on machines, so psychological factors needs to be considered as well. We need to consider the stress, we need to consider the burnout preventions, and we need to consider the emotional protection as well for employees, so they will not be negatively affecting the work environment, and they will not be negatively affecting the product quality and product conformity requirements. 7.5.1 is related to monitoring and measurement resources. You can call it like the monitoring and measurement devices as well, whatever is required in your processes or in the quality control or quality assurance activities. So according to 7.5.1 general, the organization shall determine and provide resources needed to ensure valid and reliable results when monitoring and measurement is used to verify the conformity of the products and services to the requirements. So whenever you are needing such equipment, such devices, you need to make sure that those devices are provided. Maybe say it might be the measuring scales, it might be the pressure gauges, it might be the temperature gauges, it might be some other type of measuring devices. So according to this clause, you need to make sure that resources available related to the monitoring and measurement devices. The organization shall ensure that the resources provided are suitable for the specific type of monitoring and measurement activities, which is quite based upon the common sense, and are maintained to ensure their continuing fitness for the purpose. So you need to make sure that they are regularly maintained and their regular calibration or verification activities performed. The organization shall retain appropriate documented information as an evidence of fitness for purpose of the monitoring and measurement resources. So whatever equipments, whatever devices you have, you need to make sure that you are maintaining the records which provides the evidence that they are fit for use. 7.1.5.2 is related to measurement traceability. So those equipments which we talked earlier, but that if they are required to measure or monitor the performance of product or services, then we will be requiring them. And once we have those equipments, then we need to make sure that they are giving the right results. So this clause is talking about that subject, and it says that when measurement traceability is a requirement or is considered by the organization to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity of measurement results, measurement equipment shall be either calibrated or verified or both at specified intervals or prior to the use against the measurement standards traceable to either national or international standards. When no such a standard exists, the basis used for calibration or verification shall be retained as documented information. So if you are having equipments and you require them to give you the right readings, maybe it is required by the legal bodies, maybe it is required by the customers, maybe it is required by your own management. In that case, you need to make sure that appropriate verification or calibration activities are performed, and those activities should be performed against the defined standards. Maybe those standards might be available at a national level or they might be available at the international level. Both are acceptable. But in case maybe you are having a new invention of a monitoring device and you are not having any national or international standards to create the basis for calibration, in that case you can define your own basis which will not be traceable to any national or international standards, but they will be recorded and you will maintain it until some of the international standard comes up for that particular calibration or verification activity. B is identified in order to determine the status, and C is the safeguard from adjustment, damage, or deterioration that would invalidate the calibration state and then subsequent measurement results. And the organization shall determine if the validity of the previous results has been adversely affected by the measuring equipment which is found unfit for the purpose or for use, and shall take appropriate actions as necessary. So requirements are quite straightforward. It says that you have to calibrate it according to the national or international standards. You have to identify it so everybody knows about the status, whether the equipment is calibrated or not calibrated. So you find the way how you would like to identify it. You need to safeguard from the adjustment and damage and deterioration. Definitely, it is quite logical that if you are having an equipment and you want it to give you the right readings, you need to make sure that nobody is disturbing its adjustment, nobody is changing its values, nobody is damaging it, and the equipment is not getting deteriorated. So you need to make sure that the equipment is appropriately protected all the times. And if in case, because we are human beings, we can have circumstances which are not in our control. In case if the equipment is damaged or deteriorated and we find it out that the values are not appropriate, values are not correct, then we need to see that how those values have affected the products which we have tested, the service which we have tested, and we should take appropriate corrective actions in that regard.
Clause 7.1.6 is related to the organizational knowledge. According to this clause, the organization shall determine the knowledge necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve the conformity of products and services. This knowledge shall be maintained and be made available to the extent necessary when addressing the changing needs and trends. The organization shall consider its current knowledge and determine how to acquire or access any necessary additional knowledge and required updates. This clause is a new clause in ISO 9001. In the previous standards, whether it is 1987, 1994, 2000, or 2008, this particular clause was not there. But why they felt a need to introduce this knowledge management related clause in 2015 version? The reason is very simple, because earlier the 1987 version of ISO, 1995, 1994 version of ISO, it was heavily relying on documentation, and almost every single clause was requiring a documented procedure. Slowly and gradually, because of a reason, because generally in the market there was a misconception that ISO is only talking about documentation, and it's not more than documentation. It's not very useful, it is not very beneficial, it is just merely the documentation, and you just need to write down whatever you are doing and do what you write, and that's the way ISO was perceived at that point of time, which is completely a misconception, I believe, because I've worked on those standards as well. And I strongly feel that ISO at that time also, it was asking for effective quality management system. It was not merely asking for documentation. But anyways, generally in the market, that was a misconception, and it was very widespread. So ISO organization at that point in time decided to change this perception, and they brought some major changes in the structure of quality management system. They started reducing the mandatory documentation requirements from 1994 version to 2000. They reduced some documentation requirement, and from 2000 to 2008 version they reduced some documentation requirement, and finally when we reached to 2015 version of ISO, almost all the documentation mandatory requirement is eliminated. There are only three places where a standard is talking about mandatory documents now. One is 4.3, which is scope, the 5.2, which is policy, and third one is 6.2, which is talking about the quality objectives. But it doesn't really mean that ISO 9000 is not requiring documentation. So previously there was a misconception that ISO is all about documentation, which is a misconception. I always say that. And now we are having a misconception generally in the market that ISO is not requiring documentation and ISO is not promoting documentation, and documentation is not important, which is again a misconception, which is absolutely wrong. ISO it doesn't say that documentation is not important. ISO believes that documentation is extremely important because documentation carries the knowledge which you require to perform the job as per the needs and expectations of your interested parties. So because those documentation requirements are being eliminated, so there is the possibility that people will perceive it in a different way, and they will believe that documentation is not needed or not required. So ISO has introduced this clause of knowledge management, because knowledge is important, right? You need to have the right knowledge to perform the right job. So whatever processes you have, whether it is procurement, whether it is sales, whether it is design and development, whether it is production, whether it is marketing, whether it is any other process, if you want to perform that process as per the needs and expectations of interested parties, you need to have the right knowledge. Then that's where ISO brought this clause in, that you need to make sure that those processes which you are performing, they are performed well based upon the right knowledge which you acquire, and you need to make sure that that knowledge is maintained and used properly throughout your organization. So different processes will be requiring different type of knowledge, different level of knowledge, and different medium of knowledge maybe might be required at different places. So you need to identify, you need to define how this knowledge will be acquired, how this knowledge will be maintained, how this knowledge will be transformed, and how this knowledge will be used throughout your operation. So knowledge management, a small part of knowledge management is introduced this time in form of clause 7.1.6. I believe it's a very good addition in ISO 9001 standard, although there is a completely separate standard also available on this particular subject, which is ISO 30401, which is knowledge management standard. But addition of this knowledge management part in ISO 9000 is also welcomed in form of clause 7.1.6. Clause 7.2 is about competence, which is quite straightforward, and this clause was there in the previous standards as well, so nothing new in this. According to this clause, the organization shall, first of all, determine the necessary competence for people who are performing the activities under its control, and they have the capability of affecting the quality management system in some manner. So it's quite logical that those people who are somehow involved in the quality management system, if they are not competent enough and based upon their degree, based upon their qualification, based upon their experience, and based upon their knowledge and skills, definitely they will be having a negative impact on quality management system. So one of the requirement is, first of all, you need to determine what sort of competency you require for these positions. Secondly, in clause B, it says ensure that these persons are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, and experience. Quite logical. And where applicable, take actions to acquire the necessary competence. So whatever gaps you identify, maybe before the hiring of somebody or after hiring somebody or during the job tenure at any point in time, First of all, you need to have a mechanism of evaluating whether people are competent or not. And if they are not competent, maybe they are competent in many areas, but some areas they require improvement. um, Everybody cannot be competent on everything from the day one. So even if you are a PhD, if you are highly qualified, you're joining an organization, you might not be competent related to their own procedures, their own work instructions, their own job descriptions, their own activities, their own processes. So you will be requiring some training, you will be requiring some awareness to become competent. So you need to identify that competency gaps, and you need to take appropriate actions to make sure that people are competent. And whatever competency evidences are available in form of degree, in form of training records, whatever evidences are available, you need to retain those information as an evidence of competence. Clause 7.3 is related to awareness. Although awareness is a part of competency requirement, if somebody wants to be competent on something, they need to be having the awareness of related subject, related information. Maybe if there are some procedures, you need to be aware of them. If there are some policies, you need to be aware of them. If there are some legal requirements, you need to be aware of them. So whenever we evaluate competencies, awareness becomes a component of that evaluation as well. But because there are some subjects where ISO wanted to emphasize, and those subjects are important from the quality management point of view. So they have introduced a separate clause on awareness, and it says that the organization shall ensure that the persons work under the organization's control are aware of like few basic things. Number one is quality policy. It's very important. Most of the time, generally speaking, in most of the organization, people are not really aware of the quality policy. And the reason may be that the importance is not given to the quality policy, and people realize that the quality policy is just a document which is hanging at different walls within the organization. When it will come from the top management, and when it will be really reflecting their wishes, and when it will be really meaning something for the organization, then it will become a necessity for everyone within the organization to ensure that they are aware of the quality policy, because quality policy provides you the direction from the top management. So quality policy should be from the top management. Quality policy should define the path to quality policy, should provide the framework for setting objectives, and policy should be relevant to the organization. And according to this clause, everyone within the organization who is working under the control of the organization, they should be aware of quality policy, because this is the path, this is the way, this is the belief their top management is having. The second thing is relevant quality objectives. If I'm working in the quality department, my relevant quality objectives are related to quality department. If I'm working in the sales department, sales department might be having separate sales related quality objectives, or maybe the production department might be having production related quality objectives. So at least the people should be aware of the quality objectives which are relevant to their function and their job. Number three is their contribution to the effectiveness of quality management system, including the benefits of improved quality performance. As I told you earlier at the beginning, and when we were discussing about clause 5.1, this is one of the main responsibility of the top management to communicate this importance. But if the top management wouldn't understand what is the benefit of quality management system, if the top management wouldn't understand that deviating from the quality management system, what sort of implications it will create, then they will not be able to communicate this. So first of all, you need to make sure that top management is educated regarding this particular subject, and then you need to make sure that top management is communicating to all the employees that how important it is to meet the quality management system requirements, and how how much effects it will be having if you are deviating from the quality management system. So this is a matter of understanding at the high level, and it's a matter of communication from that level. Clause 7.4 is related to communication. According to this clause, the organization shall determine the internal and external communication relevant to quality management system, including on what to communicate, when to communicate, with whom to communicate, how to communicate, and who to communicate and who communicates. Basically, If you look at the quality management system might be having various different components. Like processes might be established, the systems might be established, a lot of procedures might be established, work instructions might be established, job descriptions might be established. Establishing a quality management system is one thing. The second important thing is how effectively you communicate the requirements related to this quality management system internally as well as externally. So in the earlier ISO standards, like in 1987 version or 1994 version, this communication part was missing, but later it was introduced, and I believe this is one of the important components. So you need to think about internal communication, that what information you should communicate internally, at what frequency, and how it will be communicated, and how you'll make sure that it is effectively communicated and people get the right information. For example, the laws are getting updated on regular basis, how the people will be updated regarding the laws. The procedures might be updated on regular basis, how the relevant people will come to know about the updation of these new procedures. Maybe different people can move from one place to the other place, from one department to the other department, from one position to the other position. How do you ensure that these people get the right information which are needed for their new task? Similarly, the external bodies, maybe the legal bodies, wants to be communicated related to quality management system, related to quality of product, quality of service. Maybe customer wants some important communication at the time of purchase, at the time of service delivery, maybe at the time of returning the products. So at various different levels, customer might be requiring clear communication from your side. So as an organization, it is extremely important to define how the internal and external communication will be performed, what will be the frequency, who will be responsible, and how it will be done. Standard is not giving you any idea that how these communications should take place, whether you should go and have one-to-one meetings, or you should have emails, or you should have memos, or you should have any other ways of communication. Standard is leaving it totally up to you. You need to identify, you need to decide based upon your needs and expectations, and based upon the needs and expectations of your interested parties. So you will be identifying the needs for internal and external communication. You will define the mechanisms, and you will identify how they will be performed, and who will be doing it, and what type of record will be maintained for communication. So this is totally up to the organization to manage this particular clause. Clause 7.5 is related to documented information. This particular terminology, documented information, is used for the first time in the previous standards of ISO. They were using the terminology as documents and records, and there were separate clauses for control of documents and control of records. So they were treating them separately. But this time, for some good reason, the reason they are not explaining anywhere, but for some good reason, they have like combined these two elements, document and record, and they are calling them collectively as documented information. So now when we go through with this clause, we'll realize that at some places we are talking about documents, and at some places we are basically addressing the records. So we will start with clause 7.5.1, which is general. The organization's quality management system shall include a documented information required by this international standard. So when we say documented information required by this international standard, it means ISO 9001. And in ISO 9001, there are three places where a standard is specifically asking about a document: clause 4.2 scope, clause 5.2 policy, and clause 6.2 quality records. So this particular statement is about those three documentation requirements. But 99.9% documentation which your organization might be having falls under the category of B, which says documented information determined by the organization as necessary for the effectiveness of quality management system. So it will be your responsibility to identify the need of documentation. Where do you require procedure, where you require work instruction, where you require any other document, you will be identifying, and you will be maintaining it. So clause 7.5.2 is related to creating and updating the documents. When creating and updating documented information, the organization shall ensure appropriate identification and description, appropriate formatting, and review and approval for suitability and adequacy. So we are talking in general about all the policies or procedures or work instructions or job descriptions. So whatever types of documents you are establishing within the organization, you need to consider these elements. So clause 7.5.3 is about control of documented information, and because now they are clubbed together, so when we say documented information, it means we are talking about documents as well as records. So what exactly the control of document is? Control of document means that if you are having a document, you need to make sure that the right document is available at the right time with the right person at the right place. So this is related to the document, whether it is policy, whether it's a drawing, whether it is a procedure, whether it is a work instruction. So that right document, the current document, the updated document, must be available with the right person at the right time at the right location. That's the document control is all about. And when it comes to the record, you need to make sure that record is protected all the time. So whether whatever form the record is maintained, whether it is in the audio form, video form, or text form, or it is available on a website, or it is available somewhere in the system, doesn't matter. You need to make sure that the record is protected properly. So this particular clause is talking about protection and control of these documents and records. So according to clause 7.5.3.1, documented information required by the quality management system and by this international standard shall be controlled to ensure it is available and suitable for the use where and when it is needed, and it is adequately protected. So first of all, in this particular clause, it is referring to those documents and records which are specifically identified in this particular standard. When we talk about control of documented information, there are few important elements which comes in our mind and which are identified in this particular clause. If you look at this clause 7.5.3.2, for the control of documented information, the organization shall address following activities as applicable. Number one, you need to define the distribution, access, retrieval, and use of documents, whether it is policy, procedure, work instruction, job description, forms, and formats. You need to think about how they will be distributed, how people will be having access, how you will be able to retrieve any document or any record, and how those documents will be used. Then number B is about storage and preservation. This particular statement is mainly for the records, because records requires appropriate storage and preservation, including the preservation of legibility. So you should be able to read the records. I remember a long time back when we were using the fax machines, the paper which was used in those fax machines, that was affected by the thermal energy, and after some time the whatever is written on the paper, that was getting vanished. So that sort of paper will not be able to maintain the legibility of record. Similarly, whatever small receipts you get from the credit card machines, after some time you will see that that information is not visible on those receipts. So you need to make sure whatever records you are managing, whatever records you are maintaining also the legibility of those records. And number C is about control of changes. Whenever you are changing any documents, whenever you are updating any procedure, whenever you are updating any policy or work instruction or job description, or even the forms and formats, how we are controlling the changes, how we are managing those changes, and how we are recording those changes. Similarly, point number D is more related to the records, which talks about the retention and disposition of records, because the record cannot be retained for undefined period of time. Like we cannot keep the record for 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, it depends. So you need to define the retention periods of the record, what type of record you have, and if there is any external requirement, maybe there is a legal requirement related to the retention, maybe there is an international requirement related to the retention, maybe there is a customer requirement related to the retention of those records. If not, then you have to define at your organizational level that what will be the retention period and how you're going to dispose that record. Similarly, when it comes to the documented information related to the external origin, you might be using some documents which are not produced by your organization or not controlled by your organization. They are established by a legal body, they are established by supplier, they are established by customer, or they are established by any international organization, but you think that those documents are needed within your organization to achieve the desired quality of your product and service. Even those documents and records you need to control according to the system which you are having. So you might have one system which is controlling all the internal documents and external documents as well, or you might have a separate system for controlling the external origin documents as well. So this is it about clause documented information in totality, because to achieve desired results from the quality management system, you need to have a quality management system in place. And to make sure that that quality management system is effectively implemented and maintained for a longer period of time, you develop documentation. It's your choice. The responsibility is given to you. At very few places, a standard is making documentation mandatory. I told you many times that at 3 places, standard is making mandatory documentation. Rest of it left on your shoulder. So you establish documentation for the protection of this knowledge which you require to used during the processes, during the implementation of those processes, so you can achieve the desired results and you can satisfy the interested parties. So these documents are extremely important source for you if you want to achieve the desired results. So control of these documents and records is extremely important, and that requirement is defined in clause 7.5, documented information. We will end our discussion here today, and we will be starting or clause number 8 in our next episode, which is related to operations. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next episode.